Have you ever noticed how certain names seem to disappear from conversations, while others somehow find a way back into the room when nobody expects it? What you're about to hear centers around one of those moments. Somewhere recently, a conversation was taking place that had absolutely nothing to do with you. Different topics were being discussed. Different stories were being shared. Life was moving along in its usual way. No one planned to mention you. No one entered that conversation expecting your name to become part of it. Yet somehow, in the middle of ordinary words and casual exchanges, your name surfaced. And the moment it did, something shifted. At first, it seemed insignificant. Just another name, just another passing reference. But for one person sitting there, it wasn't insignificant at all. The sound of your name triggered something they weren't prepared for. A memory appeared before they could stop it. A feeling they thought had settled quietly in the past suddenly returned to the surface. For a brief moment, they weren't focused on the conversation anymore. Their attention drifted somewhere else, somewhere familiar, somewhere they hadn't expected to revisit that day. And listen to this. What surprised them wasn't that they remembered you. It was how quickly everything came back. Certain details remained untouched by time. Certain moments still felt vivid. Certain emotions still carried weight. They had spent so long convincing themselves that life had moved forward, that whatever chapter involved you had become just another part of the past. Yet hearing your name spoken aloud challenged that belief in ways they couldn't explain. The conversation continued, but internally, something had already changed. Questions began appearing where certainty once existed. Thoughts they hadn't entertained in a long time quietly returned. And as the discussion moved forward, they started realizing something unexpected. The reason your name affected them wasn't because they had forgotten you. It was because a part of them never truly did. Sometimes a single name is enough to reveal what the heart has been carrying in silence all along. And for this person, that realization was only beginning. And listen carefully, because what happened next revealed far more than anyone in that conversation intended. At first, they reacted the way most people do when an unexpected name comes up. They smiled politely. They nodded. They acted as though it was no different from hearing any other name. From the outside, nothing seemed unusual. Nobody would have guessed that a simple mention of you had already stirred something beneath the surface. But the strange thing about genuine feelings is that they rarely stay hidden for long. No matter how carefully people try to control their reactions, the heart often reveals itself in small ways. And as the conversation continued, those small signs slowly began appearing. Someone casually asked a question about you. It wasn't a serious question. It wasn't even meant to be important. Yet the answer they gave carried more emotion than they realized. They remembered details instantly, details that should have faded with time, details that most people would have forgotten long ago. The way they described certain moments, the way they recalled certain memories, and the way they spoke about you all revealed something unexpected. It became clear that your name was connected to a part of their life that still occupied space within them, because your heart needs this right now. Sometimes people believe they have moved on simply because enough time has passed. They assume that distance automatically erases emotional significance. But true emotional impact doesn't disappear according to a schedule. Some memories remain because they were attached to something meaningful. Some people remain unforgettable because they taught us something about ourselves. And this person is beginning to realize that your presence may have left a deeper mark than they ever admitted. And listen to this. The conversation slowly shifted from mentioning your name to discussing memories connected to you. Nobody planned for that to happen. It happened naturally. One memory led to another. One story reminded them of another story. Before they knew it, moments they hadn't spoken about in a very long time were suddenly being revisited. What surprised them most was not the memories themselves. It was how alive those memories still felt. Certain experiences seemed untouched by time. Certain emotions still carried the same energy they carried years ago. It was as though a part of their heart had preserved those moments without their knowledge. As they continued talking, others in the conversation started noticing something interesting. Whenever your name came up, their attention changed. Their voice changed. Their level of engagement changed. They became more present, more thoughtful, more reflective. Even when they tried to keep things casual, something deeper kept finding its way into their words. And although nobody said it directly, the atmosphere began shifting. People could sense there was more behind the stories than simple nostalgia, because your heart needs this right now. The truth often reveals itself through ordinary conversations, not through grand confessions, not through dramatic moments. Through small observations, spontaneous memories, and reactions people never intended to show. This person wasn't trying to expose their feelings. In fact, they may have believed those feelings were completely under control. Yet the more they spoke, the more difficult it became to hide the emotional weight still attached to your name. And listen carefully. There came a moment when someone mentioned a memory involving you, and for a brief second, silence filled the space. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that happens when a memory carries more meaning than words can easily explain. In that moment, they found themselves reflecting rather than speaking. They weren't just remembering what happened, they were remembering how it felt. And sometimes those are two very different things. The deeper the conversation went, the more they began noticing things about themselves. They noticed how quickly certain memories returned. They noticed how clearly they could still picture certain moments. Most importantly, they noticed that despite everything life had brought them since then, your name still had the power to capture their attention in a way few others could. That realization wasn't something they expected. It wasn't something they planned to confront. Yet there it was. Impossible to ignore. By the time the conversation started winding down, something inside them had changed. What began as a casual mention of your name had turned into an unexpected journey through memories, emotions, and reflections they thought had been left behind. And for the first time in a long while, they found themselves wondering why your name still carried so much significance. Why certain memories remained so vivid. Why hearing about you still created a reaction they couldn't fully explain. And those questions would stay with them long after the conversation ended. In fact, they were only beginning to uncover what those questions were truly trying to reveal. And listen to this, because as the conversation continued, something happened that nobody expected. What started as a simple discussion suddenly became a mirror, reflecting truths that had been hidden in plain sight. At first, everyone was simply sharing memories and observations. But then, someone made an innocent comment, a comment that seemed small in the moment, but carried far more weight than anyone realized. They pointed out how naturally your name kept returning to the conversation, not because anyone was forcing it, not because anyone was trying to bring attention to you. It just kept happening. Somehow, no matter where the discussion started, it seemed to find its way back to you. For a brief moment, nobody said anything. The observation hung in the air longer than expected. And for the person who had been speaking about you, that silence felt different. Suddenly, they were no longer focused on the conversation itself. They were focused on what the conversation was revealing about them. They began replaying everything they had just said, every memory, every detail, every reaction. And the more they reflected, the harder it became to ignore something they had never fully acknowledged before, because your heart needs this right now. Sometimes we become so accustomed to carrying certain feelings that we stop noticing they're there. They become part of our emotional background. We assume we've moved on because we've learned how to live with them. We assume we've healed because we've stopped talking about them. But occasionally, life places us in situations where those hidden emotions suddenly become visible again. This person is experiencing exactly that, and listen carefully. For years, they may have convinced themselves that what happened was simply part of the past. They told themselves that enough time had passed. They told themselves that life had moved forward. Yet hearing others talk about you created an unexpected shift in perspective. It allowed them to see their own emotions from the outside, and what they saw surprised them. They realized that most people don't remember details the way they remembered yours. Most people don't carry memories with that level of clarity. Most people don't react the way they reacted when a name is mentioned. If the connection no longer matters, the realization didn't arrive dramatically. It arrived quietly. The kind of realization that settles into the heart rather than striking all at once. They began noticing how easily stories involving you surfaced. They noticed how naturally they defended certain memories. They noticed how much emotion still existed beneath their carefully controlled words. And perhaps most surprising of all, they realized they weren't struggling to remember you. The memories were already there, waiting beneath the surface the entire time, because your heart needs this right now. The truth often reveals itself when we stop trying to find it. This person wasn't searching for answers. They weren't looking for hidden feelings. Yet the conversation uncovered them anyway. It exposed something they had been avoiding for longer than they realized. The possibility that your role in their life had been far more significant than they once believed. And listen to this. As the conversation moved on, they found themselves thinking less about the stories being told and more about what those stories meant. Certain moments suddenly seemed more important. Certain memories carried new meaning. Certain experiences felt different when viewed through the lens of time and understanding. What once appeared ordinary now seemed valuable. What once felt distant now felt surprisingly close. By the end of the conversation, one thing had become impossible to ignore. They were not as detached from the connection as they had convinced themselves they were. The emotional weight attached to your name was still there. The impact was still there. The unanswered questions were still there. And for the first time in a very long while, they found themselves wondering whether they had truly understood your importance when you were part of their life. Because sometimes it takes another person's observation to reveal a truth we've been quietly hiding from ourselves. And that truth was beginning to become impossible for them to ignore. And listen to this, because what happened after the conversation ended may have been even more important than the conversation itself. Once everyone went their separate ways and the noise of the day began to fade, they expected those thoughts to disappear. They assumed the memories would settle back into the background where they had remained for so long. But that didn't happen. Instead, the conversation followed them, not physically but mentally. Certain comments replayed in their mind. Certain observations echoed louder than they should have. No matter how hard they tried to focus on other things, they kept finding themselves returning to the same thoughts, the same memories, and the same questions. At first, they tried to dismiss it. They told themselves they were simply overthinking. They told themselves the conversation had stirred up old memories and nothing more. Yet the deeper they reflected, the harder that explanation became to believe. Because it wasn't just the memories returning. It was the meaning behind those memories that had begun to change. Moments they once viewed as ordinary suddenly seemed important. Conversations they barely thought about before now carried a different weight. It was as if time had quietly removed all the distractions and left only the truth behind, because your heart needs this right now. Sometimes clarity doesn't arrive when an experience happens. Sometimes clarity arrives years later, when life has provided enough distance for a person to finally see what was standing in front of them all along. This person is beginning to experience that kind of clarity, the kind that cannot be rushed. The kind that appears when the heart is finally ready to understand something the mind wasn't prepared to accept before. And listen carefully. The more they reflected, the more they started questioning certain assumptions they had carried for a long time. Assumptions about what mattered. Assumptions about what they had left behind. Assumptions about what role you truly played in their life. For years, they may have viewed the connection through a particular lens. But now that lens was changing. The conversation had forced them to step outside their usual perspective and examine things more honestly. And honesty has a way of revealing things that comfort often hides. What surprised them most was how naturally your name continued appearing in their thoughts after the conversation ended. They weren't forcing themselves to think about you. They weren't intentionally revisiting old memories. Yet certain moments kept surfacing on their own. a shared experience, a meaningful conversation, a feeling they once overlooked. Each memory seemed connected to a larger realization that was slowly taking shape within them, because your heart needs this right now. There are moments in life when people realize that what they considered finished was never truly resolved. Not because they want to go backward, but because they finally understand something they didn't understand before. This person is beginning to recognize that some connections leave lessons behind that continue unfolding long after the chapter appears to end. The more they reflect, the more they see how those lessons shaped them. And listen to this. As the days passed, the conversation became less about what was said and more about what it revealed. It revealed that your memory still carried significance. It revealed that certain emotions had survived despite the passage of time. It revealed that your impact remained present in ways they never fully acknowledged. Most importantly, it revealed that they may have underestimated the importance of what they shared with you. Now, instead of avoiding those thoughts, they are beginning to sit with them. Instead of dismissing those memories, they are beginning to learn from them. And with every reflection, one truth becomes a little clearer. The conversation didn't create these feelings. The conversation simply exposed feelings that had been quietly waiting beneath the surface all along. And now that they have seen them clearly, pretending they don't exist is becoming harder with every passing day. And listen to this, because after all the reflection, all the unexpected memories, and all the thoughts that refuse to leave their mind, they have finally reached a point where something can no longer be ignored. The conversation may have ended days ago, but its impact did not end with it. In many ways, that conversation became the beginning of a much deeper realization. A realization that has followed them into quiet moments, followed them into ordinary days, and followed them into the spaces where people are most honest with themselves. Because once a truth has been revealed, it becomes very difficult to pretend you never saw it. For a long time, they believed your chapter in their life was fully understood. They thought they had already learned everything there was to learn from it. They thought enough time had passed to place those memories neatly in the past. Yet now they see something different. They see that certain memories remained vivid for a reason. Certain emotions remained accessible for a reason. Certain thoughts kept returning because they were connected to something genuine. The conversation didn't create that reality. It simply forced them to acknowledge it, because your heart needs this right now. People often assume that significance fades with distance. They assume that if enough time passes, the emotional impact of someone will naturally disappear. But real impact doesn't work that way. Some people become part of our story in ways we don't fully recognize until much later. Their influence continues shaping our perspective long after they are gone. Their memory continues teaching lessons long after the moments themselves have passed. And this person is beginning to understand that your presence left exactly that kind of mark. And listen carefully. The most surprising part of this realization is not that they still remember you. It is why they remember you. Out of all the people who have crossed their path, out of all the experiences life has brought them, your name still carries a unique weight. Not because of one specific moment, not because of one specific memory, but because of the overall impact you left behind. The connection became woven into their personal journey. It became part of the way they understand certain emotions, certain lessons, and even certain parts of themselves. As they continue reflecting, they are no longer asking whether you mattered. That question has already been answered. They are no longer wondering whether the connection left an impression. The evidence is everywhere. Instead, they are beginning to understand the depth of that impression. They are beginning to understand why hearing your name created such a strong reaction, why a simple conversation became impossible to forget, why one unexpected mention reopened thoughts they believed were settled long ago, because your heart needs this right now. Acceptance often arrives quietly. It doesn't always come through dramatic breakthroughs. Sometimes it arrives through repeated realizations that become impossible to deny. This person has reached that stage. They are no longer fighting what the conversation revealed. They are no longer trying to explain away their reactions. They are allowing themselves to see the truth as it is, and listen to this. The truth is simple yet powerful. Your name still means something. Your memory still carries weight. Your influence still exists in places they never expected to find it. What began as an ordinary conversation became a reminder of something extraordinary. A reminder that some connections leave a lasting imprint that time cannot fully erase. And now, after hearing your name spoken in a conversation you were never supposed to hear about, they understand something with greater clarity than ever before. Certain people pass through our lives and become memories, but a rare few become part of who we are. And whether they planned it or not, whether they expected it or not, they have finally realized that you became one of those people